Hi, this is Dr. Johnson, and I'm going to walk you through an activity called Zoom It, which is a great activity working with primary source photographs when you really want to have students focus in on details of what's happening in those photographs. So this activity you would do typically in the school in a large group. Whole group as the class does not work well with individual students or small groups. And the reason it doesn't work well is because the ideal way of doing this is having a huge projector screen. The larger you can show the photograph up on the screen, the better this activity is. This does not work with photographs where you have the 8.5, 11 by 11 that you've printed off. So you really need a large projector screen to do this in your classroom and to have it be most effective. The other thing you really need is some specific things in a photograph. First of all, you want a photograph kind of like this one that has what we call a depth of details. There's a lot happening going on in this photograph, not only in the front close to us, but also in the distance. There's details that you can see way far back behind the children and behind the field. And there's children that are in the middle of the photograph that are doing some different things. Then we have some children in the front. That's what we call the depth of details. You want photographs with that. You also are going to need to find a photograph that is very high resolution. Because we're going to be zooming in on it, we want to be able to get the highest resolution possible. And of course that means you're going to be downloading it as a digital photograph. And why are those three things important? Because as we look at different levels of depth, for instance, in that top right, you can see that number sign 63. The high resolution lets us really focus in on a great deal of detail, or even better, when you have like this boy working with the hoe, or even better, it looks like some teachers back here by this tree, or someone carrying a bag. And that only works if you have a high resolution photograph. If this photograph, when you zoom in, isn't high resolution, you can't pick out the details that you find otherwise. Now, so what are your outcomes when you do Zoom it with students? Well, you're really trying to help them focus in on details that they can find and pick out in the photograph. You're helping them learn how to do analysis techniques, how to look at photographs and kind of understand them better, which means they're also going to be hypothesizing, trying to figure out what's happening based off of what they can see. And we've captured one moment of time, and so they're going to use those context clues to kind of try to understand what's happening. There's a couple different tools you can use. I often will use a piece of software like Apple's Preview or any other software where you can open up a digital photograph, a JPEG file usually, or a TIFF file, something that's high resolution, and that it will allow you to zoom in and out easily. There's also a great website, docsteach.org, where they actually have a tool called the Zoom Crop tool. And you can build activities that allow you to zoom in and zoom out on photographs there in very high resolution. Or you could do just what I'm doing, is I've made a presentation and I've actually zoomed in on the photographs to show you the areas I want to show to you. Any of those tools will work. So let's get started. Now I'm taking the role of the teacher. I'm going to walk you through, and you're going to take the role of the student. You don't need anything. You just need your observation skills. This might be fun if you have someone else in the room with you. And the other thing is, if you're looking at this on your phone, you really want to try to get the biggest screen possible. So if there's any way to throw this video up on maybe a big screen television or on a projector, that's going to let you really look at some of these photographs with a great deal of detail. So let's get started. I've first of all prepared a great photo for you. From 1955, you might recognize some things in this photo, like the Laie Temple. And right up front on this one, I'm going to just tell you this is the very first iteration of what we now know as BYU Hawaii. These were the temporary classrooms and structures for the Church College of Hawaii in 1955 when it first opened. And the great thing about Zoom It is we could start zooming in on different things. Like, let's take a look at these cars. Well, even better, let's take a look at this rock wall. I think this rock wall is cool, and it kind of makes me think, is that wall there? We could zoom in even further to see some of that detail. I don't know if you notice at the top of that rock wall, but that has a shape to it. What shape do you kind of associate the top of that rock wall with? And if you said beehive, I think you might be correct. And why would it be shaped like a beehive? That's a great question that a historian might ask. Of course, the historian's going to say, is that true? Is my hypothesis correct? Is that a beehive? And if it is a beehive, why is it shaped like a beehive? So great historians ask great questions. Let's take a look at these cars. Have you ever heard these cars? Do you know what model of car these are, or who manufactured them? Well, with Zoom It, we can actually zoom right in and get as close as we can. And when we've zoomed in this far, we can actually start seeing a little pixelation, little dots of color. And that's as high resolution as I could get with this photograph. But it's kind of interesting to look at that. Can't really make out the license plates or any of those, but kind of fun to look at. Now, get started off looking at this photograph and zooming in a little, but I'm just curious, did you notice that there was a man next to one of the buildings? This is the great thing about Zoom It, is you can say, hey, what details did you miss? And we could hypothesize, where do you think this man is going? What is he doing? What's his job? Is he a student? Is he a teacher? What do you see that might give you some clue about any of those questions? Did you also notice the building? Building number A. Does that mean the other buildings are building B, C, and D, and E? Don't know. But if I zoom out, can you see where that man is? You might have missed this one in the photograph. Did you notice that there are cows up on the hillside? This is the great thing about Zoom It, is you can catch details like this. So if you were my students in my class, I might talk about that. Where would these cows be, students of Laie Elementary School? Where is this hillside now? Who do you think owns these cows? Are these wild cows, or are they domesticated cows? We could talk about some of those different things. We could even talk about this house. Does this house still exist? We know that the house is to the right of the temple, but I'm not quite sure where that might be. That's some investigation. And by the way, can you see the cows up there on the hillside? Here's the zoom in again. And here it is from zooming out. So you see the great advantage of Zoom It, especially with a high resolution photograph. Let's have one last one. Did you notice that the steeple? And we could talk about maybe some of the history of the churches and the buildings here in Laie. But anyway, that's a kind of an overview of how you could use Zoom It. You have students ask questions. For instance, I might ask the students in class at this point, what's an area of the photograph you want me to zoom in on? What's something interesting? And some students might want to look a little bit closer at the temple. Some students might want to see what the sign is over there on the building on the left. But you could now engage the students saying, hey, what things should we look at closer? All right, that's one way to do it. Let me show you another way of doing it. This is what I call the zooming out method. So I've taken a photograph and I have started with a really close zoom. I have zoomed in as far as I can get. So let's take a look at this photograph and kind of in your own head think about what context clues. What do you see in this photograph? Do you notice the flag at the bottom? What flag is that? Do you notice the statue? What does the statue look like it is of? I know some of you have noticed the automobiles in there, but do you also notice any animals, any horse-drawn carriages? What do you notice about the dress, the way people are dressed? And I know it's kind of hard because we're kind of zoomed in and it's a little bit grainy. But do you have any clues about where this might be or what time period it might be in? And of course, some people might say, oh, the cars give us a clue, or the dress gives us a clue, or that flag gives us a clue it might be in the United States. So let's zoom out just a little bit more and give you some more detail to look at and consider as we try to figure out, what is this a photograph of? We've zoomed out a little bit. We can still see the statue and the flag, but now we have some additional details. What are those additional details you see? Some of you are looking at Looks like a road and people going down a road. In fact, it might even look like a parade. That might be a hypothesis you've made already. Certainly looks like people are lining both sides of this, what we might call a parade. Did you notice the name on the building? The United States Trust Company. And it looks like it's adorned with a lot of U.S. flags. And I could go back to those same questions. What clues do we have about where this happened? Or what clues do we have about what is actually happening? And I think we have some clues that could help us on the what part. Let me zoom out one more time. We'll keep zooming out until we figure out what this is. Oh, there we go. Oh, there's some more clues. And by the way, I've actually, instead of zooming out, I've gone up on the photograph. So this was a little bit down later, and I'm just going to kind of shift up and look further down the street. And we have some other clues there. So what clues do you see that tell us where this is located or what is happening? And you might notice that on a lot of the buildings there's flags draped. You might have noticed some more signs on buildings and billboards. Oh, it looks like over in their top right there is the Center Market. It looks like there might be some sort of a, I don't know, it might be a harbor or water up on to the right. You would have the students as a class talk about this as you're sitting down with them. And once again, ask them those same questions. What clues do you see that tells us where this is at or when this is at? And then lastly, we would go to the whole photograph. And of course, this gives away where this is at. Students may recognize that building in the background as the U.S. Capitol building. Now, normally I wouldn't put all of this text up on the left-hand side yet. We would still talk and do some context, but I didn't want to have you spending a whole lot of time, extra time watching this video. I wanted to give you a good feel of how you could use this activity. But of course, now that we have some context clues, this is probably a parade. This is in Washington, D.C. That's the Capitol building we see in the foreground. It's not a boat harbor over there. It's just land. This is Pennsylvania Avenue. We could talk about this event. And of course, you could read more here on the screen. We're really not going to talk about it here. Just wanted to show that to you as an example of how you could use Zoom It, both zooming in as well as zooming out. All right, so that's the basic overview of Zoom It. It's a really effective activity as a whole group, a really great way to look at photographs and explore primary source documents. So for you to kind of think about now at this point, what are the important things to remember about Zoom It? What's the best way to use this with students in the class? What are the key things you need to, as a teacher in order to be able to use Zoom It effectively? With Zoom It, what are you trying to help the students do and understand about exploring primary source photographs? What type of photographs or documents work best with Zoom It? And I have to say, you don't have to do this just with photographs. You could do this with a document. Start in on a very small portion of the document and zoom out on that. That might be a fun activity to do. And of course, consider what a teacher, when might a teacher use Zoom It in their classroom. So there's your introduction. I hope you enjoyed it. I think it's a great activity, and I really like doing this in the classroom. And of course, modern technology with computers and other things really help us zoom in on photographs and make this a really effective activity. Thanks so much.